Hey guys, it's Mr. Yacht. Hey, I'm just giving you a quick overview. Totally winging this. I'm only doing this at the end of 2014-2015 school year. I'm going to redo these, but I'm just going to kind of wing it and go through some of my reviews that I've had, just so you get an idea of these four different groups. I want to put them into separate audio so you don't have to listen to all four at one time. The first one that I'm going to do is immigration, migration, and emigration. And I'm going to go through these different years and different time periods so you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking at here. When you look at the 1491, what you're dealing with there is you're dealing with, of course, pre-Columbian. And so what they're talking about and what you're talking about is migration. And during this time period, you're going to see the spread of maize cultivation from present-day Mexico northward into the American Southwest, more economic development, and more social diversification among the societies. There's going to be a mixing of foraging and hunting in the Northwest area and in areas of California. I would definitely know about the migration along the Great Basin, which is Utah, Nevada area, along with the Great Plains. If you picture the United States, the Great Plains would be located the Dakotas, Kansas, and Nebraska, that area. And they were mobile, but they're not going to become incredibly mobile until the introduction of the horse in the 1500s. Then you hit the time period 1492, of course, Columbus sailing the ocean blue, and when Columbus comes over here, that expands into the Columbian Exchange. So you should know the series of interactions and adaptations that's going to take place. What's going to exchange? Of course, the incredible exchange that is going to be a detriment to the American Indians is going to be the introduction of disease. That's going to kill 90% of the American Indians, or 90% of the American Indians that will be killed. Let me put it this way: 90% of the American Indians that will be killed by disease, not by warfare. And it's not really a planned genocide. It's just the interaction that they will actually have with the Europeans. Then, of course, of all the crops and the introduction of the different animals and stuff like that, and livestock is going to change American Indian life. So you have a immigration from Europe. Christopher Columbus, of course, being sponsored by the Spanish, Isabella and Ferdinand, that are sponsoring him to come over here, and he ends up making 4 trips over here. By the 1500s, you're going to see the rise of 2 major empires that are moving into the area of what's now the American Southwest, which is the Spanish and the Portuguese. The Spanish primarily will take over the Aztec Empire, of course, primarily through disease. You have the Portuguese are also going to be here, and that leads to the Treaty of Tordesillas that we will actually cover at a later PowerPoint. 1500s, I really want you to center on the United States in this fashion. If you can look at a U.S. map, the American Southwest, that's the Spanish. The Spanish are coming here in the American Southwest. If I say the Dutch, you should automatically think of New Jersey and New York. That's where the Dutch are settling, and they're going to end up settling also in Pennsylvania. So they're in the northeast part. The French are coming in through the St. Lawrence River down Canada, and they will settle along the back country, which is the Ohio River Valley, if you can picture that. And also the Spanish are down in the southeast, which is St. Augustine, which is in Florida, which will be the first permanent European establishment in the New World. The British, during the 1500s, give it a try. You're going to have the British try to immigrate during this time period. Of course, you got the lost colony of Roanoke that's going to be just off of Virginia, but that will not be successful. And but you do have one baby that is born, those of you that know that, which is Virginia Dare. She's the first British citizen that's actually born in the colonies, but we actually don't know what happened to her because it's a lost colony. As soon as you see this next date, those first 3 time periods transport you through period 1. Period 1 really is looking at non-British. So you're looking at Spanish, you're looking at Portuguese, you're looking at Columbian Exchange, you're looking at improvements in technology. European expansion into the Western Hemisphere and that type of stuff. But as we approach period 2, you're going to start to see a shift. It's a shift towards the imperial goals that each of these countries are going to start to have, and of course the introduction of the British. In 1607, you're going to have the British establish the first permanent English colony at Jamestown, and but they will be greeted there by the Powhatans. And in doing so, they're going to have very hard, difficult times. They'll have Powhatan Wars. There'll be 3 Powhatan Wars, I believe. Ones are in the 10s, the 1610s, and you have some in the 1620s, and I believe another one in the 1640s. You should definitely know John Smith is going to bring leadership to Jamestown. And in doing so, it's going to help for the permanent establishment and more immigrants coming to colonies during this time period. You also see the headright system, which is going to be the growth of indentured servitude, where people actually paid for people to come actually over to the colonies, and in doing so, they would work off their 7 years, and then they would be given a parcel of land and the opportunity to make a new life. And so indentured servitude really is going to be opened up. You also see the introduction of slavery during this time period, and I will get to more of that later on when I talk about African Americans and Native Americans. When you're talking about 1607 to 1750, you got to talk about the colonies. You should know the difference. When I say the Chesapeake region, you should automatically think about Jamestown and Pocahontas and all the things that come, tobacco and all the things that come out in the southern colony. 1620. You should automatically think about the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims are going to come before the Puritans because it's alphabetical. So you're going to have the Pilgrims come in 1620, Mayflower, all that stuff, Squanto, Massasoit Indians, all that. And then 10 years later, you're going to have the Puritans come. You're going to have the City Upon a Hill, John Winthrop, the Puritan work ethic, all the major contributions that the Puritans are going to have to that area, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And very close-knit. They're a very close-knit but homogeneous society, as opposed to in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, you're going to have William Penn going to found that colony in the 1600s, and in doing so, it's the most heterogeneous of all the colonies, and that's a middle colony. So you got to think of the Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. Those are your New England colonies with Thomas Hooker and Roger Williams, and you can't forget Anne Hutchinson. Then you're also going to have the middle colonies of New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and then you have the southern colonies below the Mason-Dixon line, starting with Maryland, with the Maryland Toleration Act, going all the way down Jamestown, and then finally with the last colony. I believe Georgia was founded in 1732. So you're going to have that as far as the immigration of the British coming here. The next time period that you're going to hit is 1763 to the 1850s. When you're talking about immigration there, in 1763, you should think about the Proclamation Line. That is trying to stop migration. The British are trying to stop the American colonists from moving west because they keep running into the Indians, and in doing so, causing problems. And so they're trying to stop them from moving west. No, there's no wall built or anything like that. So of course the colonists are going to continue moving west, causing problems, which causes the taxes to be raised, and we all know where that heads. You're going to also see during this time period, the American Revolution takes place, and as soon as that ends in 1783, another great migration is going to start to head west, and we open up our border in 1783. The United States border is along the Mississippi River. And it will stay that way until 1803 with the purchase of Louisiana. So we have westward expansion, and we're moving into American Indian land, taking their land from them, and of course you have Sacagawea, Lewis and Clark, and all that is going to explore this new land that we acquired from France in 1803, but it leads to the question of whose land is it? Is it open land? Is it owned land? Because the American Indians had communal land, where the English are going to introduce and the Spanish are going to introduce private ownership of land, which is something unique. As you progress through, as I go all the way up to the 1850s, you can't miss the introduction of Manifest Destiny. I always like to tie Manifest Destiny into mid-century. Manifest Destiny, mid-century, and the Mexican-American War. 1846 is the beginning of the Mexican-American War, and 1848 ends it, but then it explodes. A new wave of moving west. You have the California Gold Rush in 1849. That's going to cause people to move west, and so you just have an explosion west. And Polk's presidency is just epitomized by success from 1844 to 1848 as far as expanding into this new territory. During the Civil War, I want to say the 1850s, the 1860s, you are going to have or really 1763 to 1850s, you're going to have the old immigrants, which ends up being the old immigrants or the Western Europeans that are coming here. You have the British, you have the French, you have the Germans, you have the Chinese that are all coming here during this time period. The Chinese a lot of times get forgotten because they are on the West Coast, but they are also coming here during this time period. But they end up becoming known as the old immigrants. Then, of course, we have the Civil War, and there's not a whole lot of immigration. There's still some migration that are going on during that time period because you're going to have in 1862, you have the Homestead Act. Lincoln purposely opens up the West to free soilers to move out the West. You're not going to have slavery, so he's purposely expanding no slavery into that territory. 1877 to 1914. This is the Gilded Age. We need workers. We need industrial workers, and this is the largest time period in U.S. history that we are going to see an immigration from Europe, and really it's primarily Southern and Eastern Europeans that are coming here between 1877 and 1914. This is you're going to see during the Gilded Age, of course, the wages are going to be low, the working conditions are going to be harsh, but it's an opportunity. It's much better than the opportunities they had in Europe, so that's why people keep coming here. And like I said, it's the largest immigration that we have up until 1914. Of course, it ends in 1914 because of the beginning of World War I. But 1914 to 1918, we're going to see a movement of African Americans, which is known as the Great Migration. And they're going to move from the south to the north. It's almost like the fulfillment of Booker T. Washington wanting these people to be successful. They're going to learn skills, and in doing so, they become extremely successful, which ends up leading to their prosperity. So there is a migration. Speaking of migrations, I forgot one. I got to go back. There is a migration. When I mentioned the Puritans, you want to go back to that category right here and make sure that in the 1630s there is a great migration. When I talked about John Winthrop and during the Puritans, you should know that that is also known as a great migration. So you have a great migration here in 1914 to 1918 of African Americans, and you have the Puritans here in the 1607 to 1750, and really it's the 1630s. 1920s, you start to see the quota acts. The quotas are going to be put into place where we start to have a little bit of nativists. The 1920s and the 1840s and 1850s are very much similar, very anti-immigrant. You have in the 1850s, you have the Nina laws. No Irish need apply. They really don't like the Irish coming here. In the 1920s, we don't like a lot of these unskilled workers coming here taking our jobs. And so we will institute two quota acts, one in 1921 and one in 1924. 1930s, the unique thing about the 1930s is this is the decade where, for the first time in U.S. history, we actually have more people leave the United States. And, of course, they're leaving the United States. Why? Yes, of course, you all guessed it, because of the Great Depression. So we have more people that are actually leaving the United States during this time period. 1940s, you're actually going to see World War II, which you'll see almost a stagnant as far as immigration is concerned. But you do see a migration during this time period. It's a forced migration during this time period of the Japanese internment camps during World War II. And, of course, you got the Korematsu case that goes along with that, Korematsu v. United States, that is decided by the Supreme Court in 1944. The war ends in 45, and when it ends, you're going to see a large migration again in the United States. And this migration is going to be from the cities to the suburbs. And this is going to bring about suburbia. the 1950s, glorifying the family, the nuclear family, you know, dog, cat, two parents, 2 kids, all that stuff. Everything was good in the 1950s, but you see a migration from the city to the suburbs. It's also known as white flight. A lot of the people that are actually moving out are the whites out of the inner city, and in doing so, they leave the cities to primarily African Americans and Latinos, and we see that come back in the 1960s. In 1945 to 1965, that's probably the largest period right there of the growing of the suburbs. You also see during this time period the growth of the Sun Belt. From 1945 to 1965, the lower South. Yeah, I was born and raised in Arizona, as most of you know, and I've now moved to Texas. So I've lived in the southern and southwest all my life, including in California, and people keep moving here. Why? Well, in 1945, I don't know if it's that specific year, but they're going to introduce something to the South that's going to allow people to live in the South. What do you think it is? I'll give you a little moment to think about it. Something that we all can't live without. No, it's not snow cones. No, it's not refrigerators, but it is air conditioning. You have to have air conditioning in order to live in the South. And that's what's going to be introduced that allows us to actually live in the South, and the population of the South blossoms. Texas now being the second most populous state in the union, right behind California. And when I say right behind, we're still several million, almost 20 million behind California. Last but not least, 1965 to the 2000s, you're going to see the growth of the Latino movement and the Latino immigration to the United States. This starts really from the 1940s with the Bracero program that allowed immigrants to come from Mexico and work in the United States during World War II. But by 1965, you're going to see a large Latino influx into the 2000s, and we're still trying to decide what we're actually going to, how we're going to assimilate the Latinos in, and I suppose, especially when you talk about illegal immigrants versus legal immigrants, or you know, how they're going to be incorporated into the society. President Obama, if you want to go all the way to the present, 2015 has written an executive order that has granted 5 million illegal immigrants almost an indefinite stay in the United States, and so that's caused some controversy in 2015. So that's immigration, migration, and emigration from 1491 to the 2000s. Just over 17 minutes, so it hopefully gives you a little bit of history for this time period.